Welcome back, America. It's Hugh. Thank you so much for joining me. Next hour, I'm going to have George W. Bush join me to talk about his brand new book, Out of Many, One. And I encourage you to watch it on YouTube, as I'll be showing some of his portraits, talking with him about immigrants in America and the stories behind them and his comments on policy. So that's at 8:33 Eastern in the next hour. Joined now by James Hohmann of the Washington Post. He's a columnist at the Post. He's my friend from Minnesota. Hello, James. How are you?
Hey, Hugh, good to be with you. And I love the Bush book. I ordered it. The paintings are great, and it's quite a fun read.
It's an amazing, inspiring read. I look forward to talking to the former president about it at length, and I'll post that over at my podcast, the interview later today. I'll talk to you about immigration in a second. First, I want to talk to you about your column. Biden wasn't really ready on day one. His stumble on refugee numbers shows why. Now, many of the people who are profiled in W's book are refugees, and they go through hell to get here. And Biden originally promised during the campaign to raise the refugee numbers. Donald Trump did pretty well on refugees to the last year. Because of COVID, the numbers plummeted. And then there's a false narrative out there, fake news, that he was against refugees. He had very high numbers of refugees until COVID. President Biden has been slow to lift those numbers. What's been the blowback as a result?
The blowback has been significant, and it turns out that it actually is Biden himself, based on some reporting subsequently. Tony Blinken, whose stepfather, I guess, was a refugee, was a survivor of the Holocaust, personally went to Biden in the Oval Office, pleaded with him not to back off this decision. But Biden is terrified of the optics of what's happening at the southern border, and he feels like people conflate the refugee numbers, which is a separate vetting process from what's happening at the southern border. So it was Biden himself, we're told, who made the decision to back off. Now, the blowback has been so intense that in cleanup mode, the White House said that in mid-May they're going to raise the cap, and so they kind of backed off of that, and they're still saying they're going to go up to 125,000 refugees next year. But this has had consequences, and it has meant that a lot of people who had plane tickets to get here, who've already been waiting for years to get here, couldn't come. A pregnant woman was so late in her pregnancy that, now she's not able to travel. So her child won't be born a U.S. citizen. So the indecision of President Biden has certainly had repercussions.
I want the audience to understand the southern border crisis is that of undocumented people crossing the Rio Grande or walking up to asylum centers, or in some cases, coyotes bring them across the border away from the centers. It's got nothing to do with the refugee process. The refugee process is a very orderly process by which people are brought in after a period of many years due to hardship and extraordinary survival stories. I think of the Lost Boys of the Sudan, one of whom is profiled in President Bush's new book. And I think about the boat people from Vietnam and the killing field refugees and the survivors of the Rwandan and Burundi genocides, the assassinated, the daughter of an assassinated Kremlin figure. The refugees are different, James. And I don't know why the president lacks the confidence in the American people to understand that difference.
Yeah, I think he might be confused. I mean, and I think he totally misread the politics of this. A lot of the refugees are also, they're Christians in places where it, is dangerous to be a Christian. And there's a lot of evangelical support for this refugee program. And so I just think fundamentally, Biden didn't get the distinction, and I think they quickly realized this was a mistake. The blowback from Democrats on Capitol Hill last Friday after they announced that they were going to stick with the 15,000 number was more intense than anything Biden has faced since becoming president from his own left flank.
And it's right to be there. The 15,000 number, again, was President Trump's last year in office when we could not let people in because of COVID. And that's because we didn't have any tests to determine if they had COVID. And now we do have tests and people can be tested. And we probably should revert back to the Trump norm and there wouldn't be any political blowback. It's on immigration. I think our politicians are unusually ham-handed and deaf, dumb, and blind, James Hohmann. I'm going to talk about this with W. I don't think immigration reform is that difficult. If we move to a wall on the southern border, let everybody stay and move to merit-based, it would be over. I mean, it's not that hard to me. Do you think it's that hard?
I don't. I really don't. And I think politicians in both parties make it harder than it needs to be because they get political mileage out of it. But anyone can sit down, and figure out what the compromise is. It's why every time the compromise ends up looking close to something similar. You can give or take a little bit here and there, but yeah, you have to give and you have to take, and you're absolutely right. If you embrace the merit system, that it solves so many of the problems.
And people talk themselves into corner, driven there by the extremes in the party. And W made some comments. He said there are natives in the Republicans. Yeah, there are. They're not that many, but they usually dominate the Twitter conversation. There are hardliners who are probably representative of the party as a whole, but the hardliners want merit and they want the wall, but they're not. I don't see anybody. I've been covering this for 25 years, and I've written about it since 2004. I've never seen anybody who's sane call for the removal of the 14 to 20 million people in the United States who are here without papers if they are not violent or somehow connected with crime. And you know that, living in the Twin Cities, you know the Somali population. They're largely a refugee population, not an illegal immigrant population. There is no mass deportation rhetoric that abounds in Maine and in Minnesota.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No. In the Somalis, I mean, it's a huge. It changed the complexion of the community, and but it is, Minneapolis has the largest Somali population outside of Somalia now, and it's a result of our country being a welcoming place, and many of them are contributing very fruitfully to society.
I think Portland, Maine is the second. I don't know why they send these people from hot countries to Minnesota and Maine, but they do. It's really, there's one story in W's book about a refugee from Vietnam, a Da Nang orphan, who gets adopted by an American sergeant who takes her to the shores of Lake Superior, a few miles south of Lake Superior. I think to myself, that poor girl. I mean, geez, my goodness. Go from Da Nang jungle to Lake Superior, Michigan. Hello, America. So, Hohmann, I want to talk to you about the debt limit. It's the annual passion play. The Republicans came out yesterday and said, okay, and what I don't like in the media is they're treating this as though it's the ordinary debt limit. It's not. We've spent $6 trillion in response to the virus, just like we spent trillions of dollars in response to 2008. This is not a normal year. We've spent more money than we've ever spent in the history of the Republic. They need to do something, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'll definitely force the conversation about debt that hasn't happened. And, it is one of those things where, like, you and I disagree on this, I think, a little bit, in the sense that, like, Biden wants to spend money on infrastructure, and he's talking about ways to pay for it. And I think even if the ways are bad, it's good to actually have a conversation about how you're going to pay for spending again, which hasn't happened the last 15 months amid COVID. And so having the debt limit conversation is important. And it just feels like most voters are not keyed in on how problematic the debt is and how close we are to really bad levels of inflation.
Oh, we are very, very close to bad levels of inflation. People listen to the Hugh show. I don't know that we disagree. I don't want to raise the corporate income tax, but I do want sales taxes to go up. I think consumption taxes are the way to, without inflation, make sure that we can pay for the infrastructure. User taxes and consumption taxes are the way to go. And people say they're aggressive, and I say, no, they're actually visible. That's why Democrats don't like them. They're visible. And people don't like visible taxes like property taxes and income taxes. They want corporate taxes, which then appear up on your bill via price increases. And that's where the Democrats are wrong. The question is, though, we will have a debt limit passion play. And do you expect that the politics of it will be any different than they have been for the last 10 years?
No, I don't. I think, it will be, depending on the timing of when it kind of comes front and center. This infrastructure bill, I think, is in more trouble than a lot of people think for Democrats. Like, it's not a slam dunk. It's definitely going to end up getting slimmed down pretty significantly. And then after that passes, it's unclear what else Biden can really get done, spending-wise. And so then I think that you could see a real shift in the conversation where some of the vulnerable members on the Democratic side in the House and Senate start kind of trying to talk a little bit more about austerity instead of kind of it doesn't matter how much we spend.
Now, Hohmann, you're a millennial, right?
Yep.
Did you read the New York Times piece this morning on millennials and the YOLO movement?
I didn't.
It is the most ridiculous article. It's entitled, Welcome to the YOLO Economy. Burned out and flush with savings, some workers are quitting stable jobs in search of post-pandemic adventure, by Kevin Roos. Now, are you burned out?
I'm not. I love my job.
And do you have savings?
Some, yeah, I do.
And are you quitting the Post?
I will not. And it is. I mean, this generation. When you asked that question, it made me cringe because I'm not a proud millennial by any stretch.
Well, I think this is the stupidest article, and I don't think it's fair, actually. I had dinner with 3 millennials last night who were working their butts off. One just got back from deployment. I talked to you. Every young millennial journalist I know has got like 3 side hustles as well as their regular day gig. And here we've got Twitter employees are getting an extra day off per month called Day of Rest. Credit Suisse is giving its junior bankers $20,000 lifestyle allowances. Fearful of an exodus, LinkedIn recently gave a majority of its employees a paid week off. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is nobody that I know in the information economy actually works hard, physically works hard. Am I wrong?
No, it's one of those. It's this weird kind of the upper educated liberal elites are talking about how you're like, oh, it's just so exhausting. You heard that term all the time, and it is kind of like you're not working really, and you're not doing physical work. It is perplexing, and I think it does reflect the softness of the generation.
Back when I used to lay bricks with my hands and build my own house on the prairie and the wind was going down, it's just so absurd. It's just so absurd. And I think you ought to read this, and I hope you'll turn your column to it because your generation is getting a bad MO. I mean, it's really not very fair, but it's getting this bad MO. Now, there are lots of millennials running around the Post, right?
There are.
Yeah. So go and show them this article because I think there might be. I don't know any lazy millennials at the Post. By the way, have you got a new editor yet?
It's Ruth Marcus, my editor.
No, I mean over at the paper, the big editor, the Marty Barron replacement.
Oh, no, we don't.
You work for Ruth? Ruthless Ruth?
Yeah.
And you used to work for Steve, the tyrant Steve Ginsburg. Now you're working for Ruthless Ruth? Oh, my gosh. You are a millennial who might... I know. I love Ruth, and I love Steve. Be well, Hohmann. Go and read his brand new millennial-driven story on Joe Biden not being ready on day one. It's a great column. I love talking to Hohmann. Don't go anywhere, America.